Hello, everyone. Welcome to another stream of Draft Day Sports College Football 25. As a reminder, we're still in first access period. It's just a developer stream, so I can talk through some of the new features and new screens that we have access to in this year's version of the game. As always, if you have feedback on first access, questions, ideas, feel free to hop in our Discord server or Slack channels or on the forum at wolverinestudios.com. You can purchase the game in first access for a discount at wolverinestudios.com as well. And during first access, typically you get the discounted rate and you'll get a Steam key also supplied once the game goes through full release. So try and give a little bit of benefits to those who are willing to help us through first access, make sure we're launching as good of a product as we can for this iteration. So thanks to everyone for their support so far. I will jump into my league. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in chat if you're hanging out. We're trying to do a little bit earlier of a stream this weekend, just to maybe catch some folks who have slightly different schedules to view these things than when we typically do them. So for this particular stream, I'm going to spend a little bit of time trying to go into some details on what different aspects of different screens mean. Like, there's only so much help we could put on the screen before it starts to get extremely cluttered, but we can use this time to go over some of the screens to just give a little bit more details. Our last stream that will be up on YouTube eventually, we spent the better part of an hour going through pretty much every screen in the game, but I didn't go into a lot of detail on some of the screens. So this one, I'll try and do a few screens and do a little bit more details. So if there's a particular screen you want to see, check out the last stream because I think we covered pretty much every single one of them. But if you want a little more deep dive into some screens, I'll be doing that in this stream. And feel free to ask questions and provide feedback, and maybe in some future streams or some future YouTube videos, we can go into more deep dives on the screens themselves that you particularly have questions about. So typically the screens that we get the most questions about are the depth chart and the strategy screens. So the way that the depth charts work in the Draft Day Sports football games is that we'll have packages, which we consider more like personnel packages, and then you're able to create multiple depth charts or packages as you see fit. So you're able to create multiple of these. You can let the head coach set them, and then you can tweak out who you maybe want as your starter. Save the package. You know, you can rename the package here. So this would I could just do package 2 here, and so this basically allows you to set as many combinations of the depth chart as you want for your particular team. So then later on, we get to the other views. You're able to swap out these packages to get the looks that you're looking for. So when we hop into the strategy screen, I'm going to go over kind of how this works. So the offensive play caller is either your head coach or your OC, and the defensive play caller can be your head coach or your OC. And then they have these particular playbooks that they like to run, and they have particular run pass weights that they adhere to. So the run pass weight is basically if you set this number to 100, you are setting it to pass not 100% of the time, but you're setting it to pass 100% of the allowable time within the engine guardrails. So elsewhere in settings, you can change kind of what the split is. If you have a 60-40 split where your league passes 60% of the time but rushes 40% of the time, maybe you have a 70-30, maybe you have an 80-20. You can kind of set those up in the league settings so that you allow your coaches and the players in your league to go further outside the bounds from what is the norm in a collegiate or even a pro football game. You rarely see, like, unless you go back to the olden years where you have teams rushing 90% of the time and they only pass like 5 times a game, right? Those kinds of things are very rare in modern football to have extreme, maybe a game or two here or there, you could see that kind of thing happening, but over a season, you wouldn't see those kinds of numbers. So the game itself has these bounding numbers to keep within a reasonable 40-60 split, 35-65 split or whatever, where you can't go too far either way and then make it an unrealistic game. So the run pass weights are set where you can then fine tune those things. So if the maximum that could ever be done in the game is 80% passing and 20% rushing, if you set your weight here to 100, you're going to get that close to that 80%. So it doesn't hurt to set these higher than you would expect to set them, knowing that the game is going to then kind of squish the ends a little bit. So 50-50 is always fine. That makes sense. But for example, this particular coach on 3rd and long is set at 73. There's no reason. In some cases, coaches can dial this back a little bit, but you could set this to 100 safely in default leagues, the ones that haven't had their league settings adjusted. You could set this number to 100, and then if the overall engine is shooting for a 40-60 split, you'd get 60% passing and 40% rushing on 3rd and long anyway. If you set this to 100, by setting it to 73, it knocks that back a little bit, so you wouldn't see a full 60-65% passing. It would be roughly 75% of that, so you'd end up more 55-ish 45 instead of 60-40. So it's a little bit complicated to, I obviously as a developer, I see the math, I know kind of how all these things are put together and what drives them up or down. But I think one of the biggest helping ideas is that this number can be cranked all the way to 100, if especially for these extreme situations where 3rd and long, where you really do want to pass all the time. Feel free to crank this up to 80, 90, 100 and be fine. It doesn't actually mean that it's going to pass 100% of the time. It just means that it's going to pass as much as possible if you set that to 100. So, and same for the flip side, for your short yardage situations or your goal to go, inside the 5, inside the 3, that kind of thing. Feel free to set this number even lower. Set it to 5 if you want to make sure that you're always trying to rush and pound it in. But you can feel free to tinker with these numbers. When you go to a custom playbook, then you can, or custom play caller, now you can determine which of the playbooks you want them to use for each scenario, and then you can change the weights accordingly. So that's kind of how those numbers work. I know these have been problematic in the past because it's kind of hard to know all of the different variables that are triggering to determine what does a 60 mean versus what happens if I change this to 59 or 61 and that kind of thing. And yeah, so there's a little bit of a discussion on that. So in game plan, you have the ability to change kind of your week to week game plan. The depth charts aren't really meant to be changed. Like you set them during week 1 or whatever based off if you're 2 deep or 3 deep and you're good to go. The game plan is really meant to be changed each week, or at least tweaked a little bit. Like you might have a main game plan that you use on a weekly basis, and then you might go ahead and adjust some of the things like targeted players or preparing against a particular offense or defense look. But that's kind of what the game plans are for. You can either use a coach's game plan, or you can create a new game plan, which flips this basically into custom, and then you're able to go through and change all of these values for your upcoming week if that's this game plan that's in this box is the select the game plan for the next game. So that's kind of how that works. Um, while we're in here, I'll go over the substitution logic. This is a relatively new feature uh, for the college game. The the depth charts have this concept of a backup package or a default package, and the backup package is the one that you want deployed when you are in a particular uh, scenario, and this box controls it. So when you have a point margin, when you're up or down by 28 points in this case, it will start kicking over and using your backup package. It'll ignore whatever package you've set for that particular scenario, and it'll use the backup package instead. So this is just kind of garbage time, or you just don't want your starters going up against people if you're already down by 28, or if you're up by 28, you want to get some backup, some work. That's kind of how that works. Um, the substitution logic for energy is a little bit different. So the way this works is that every player has an endurance rating. Every player, depending on what position they play, how many snaps they're in, what happens during the snaps, like are they ripping off 80-yard runs and whatnot. You want to be able to substitute those guys in and out so they stay somewhat fresh. So the substitution logic is that the energy, which ties closely to endurance, is it'll fall as they play. It'll rise as they rest when they're not on the field. And so the way this works is once they fall below your minimum set, it'll sub them out, and it won't sub them back in until they've recuperated at this max number. So that prevents the issue of taking somebody out when they're at 61 and then putting them right back in, or like when they fall to 60, taking them out, and then when they get to 61, you put them right back in. Then it kind of ping pongs back and forth, and we'll like constantly sub them in and out. So by adding this min and max, it lets them, you can run them down to as low as 40 or whatever before you sub them out, and then let them get a good rest before they come back in. So you can tinker with these numbers and see which ones you like, how quickly your guys recover. Again, depends on their endurance ratings and other aspects of your play calling, but you can play with these numbers to see how to get a good mix of your players being in the game versus having them rotate out, whether the defensive linemen that you want to rotate more, or your running backs or whatever. This setting affects all of them because they all kind of rise and fall at different rates based off of their position. So I think they're all relatively balanced, but that's how that works. So in formations, this is where the tie-in occurs between the depth charts that you've created and the particular formation selection happens. So this screen is basically, if I want to run two tight ends, I probably want to create a package that has my two tight ends in it. If I expect to be doing a lot of running, maybe I'll have a package that has two blocking tight ends in it. And for my passing, I might have a personnel package that has more passing tight ends or blocking tight ends, depending on how you want to do it. So in theory, you can create a package for each of these. We don't have limits on the number of packages anymore, but that's how this kind of thing works. So if you're going to be I formation, you're going to be running, it'll pick whatever package that you've set up for that. So you can have, you might sub in real particular. A lot of times it would be tight ends, maybe fullbacks, maybe running backs. Maybe when you're in pass mode, you're going to want a slightly different package with more pass-focused players. But in running, you might want more run-focused kind of players. Most of the time, you're going to leave the same wide receivers. You're going to leave, most of the time, you're starting running backs probably are going to be the same unless it's third down. And then your linemen rarely change, but the tight ends probably would. So you can do those kinds of things there. That's how that's set up. Defense, it breaks it out based off of whether you're gearing up to just focus on short and medium scenarios, or whether you're focusing on medium long scenarios. So this allows you to, for medium long, maybe you want a few more nickelbacks in, you want focus on coverage style players, uh, more safeties, more cornerbacks, more strong safeties, uh, versus maybe when you're in short and medium, you want more linebackers, more strongs, so more free safeties and defensive backs for medium and long, and more strong safeties and linebackers in certain packages for short and medium. You can change your defensive ends to be more run stoppers versus edge edge rushers, that kind of thing. So that's kind of where you could set up all those different kinds of packages and then set them in here so that the game, when a game finds a play that is based off of a 4-3, it'll put those particular packages in. This is where you can set your special teams package, which we just have the one. And again, this one also will flip over to backup based off of the settings we saw on the other screen. But this is, we didn't break out scenarios for special teams. It's pretty much all the same. And then backup assignments, this is where you might have the backup package that the game creates, and you adjust the backup package, or maybe you create different backup packages that you want to use. Maybe you want to try 3 or 4 different ones, or maybe you have a specific backup package that you want to use for uh, the spring games or bowl games or whatever. This probably occurs a little bit more in the pro game, but for the college game, we're going to leave the setting in to keep them consistent. This is where you set which package is the backup package that the game switches over to. Custom playbook, I think this is an advanced feature, and if we had questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. But I think this probably deserves its own 15-20 minute video talking about how this works. We tried to make it as self-explanatory as we could. So you go into manage custom plays if you want to create custom plays. Otherwise, you can create your custom playbooks here, which then show up in your play calling, so that you can set a specific playbook for a specific for a particular scenario. So when you come in here to see these, you see the frequency that plays are run at. You can see which plays you're having success with, which plays might be just horrible for your team, and then that allows you to adjust the playbooks and then go back into play calling and make sure you're assigning them to the right scenario. So we can go into more in depth on the custom plays itself and some of the pros and cons of the different playbook setups that you have, but it's basically just a way of allowing you to create these versus using the coach specific one. So a little bit of an advanced feature if you want to just game plan, just let the coaches call everything, and then you can just adjust your game plan. It's kind of up to you how much in depth you want to go into these things. So the last thing that I'll cover in this quick session is training. So the way the training works is that we have 4 different training programs is kind of the best way to look at it. So each of these is a level of intensity that you're putting the player through, whether it's positional drills, athletic training, physical training, or game tape. All of these work a little bit different depending on the position that you're looking at. So we've added a little bit of a note up here in the upper right hand corner so you can see basically what those aspects of your training schedule look like. So for positional drills, it'll be improving your skills related to your position. So for defense, it would be tackling. For offense, it might be runner pass blocking. For all the different positions, they all kind of have their specialties that they focus on. Arm for a quarterback, that kind of thing. So if you want specific ratings to go up based off of positional drills, that's the one that you would use. If you want more general training, the athletic training is more trying to get speed and agility to increase, because speed traditionally is kind of a hard thing to train, right? You either are a super fast kid out of high school, and you can get a little bit faster, a little bit slower, but you're not going to be uh, go from a 5 second 40 to a 4 second 40 just by training a little bit in the off season, right? That's a lot of that is just innate, physical, talented speed. But we do allow for athletic training to get little bits of bumps here or there for things like speed and agility. The physical training is more strength and endurance. So your offensive linemen might need a little bit more strength and endurance. You might put running backs in there to try and get their endurance up, or maybe get them a little stronger to break tackles and that kind of thing. And game tape is where you can put players, your defensive backs, your quarterbacks, anybody that you want to try and bump up their intelligence to, it will affect things like their pursuit of the ball for quarterbacks. It'll affect uh, how they do their targeting, whether they're targeting the right players or players past the sticks, or whether they're constantly dumping it off all the time, avoiding interceptions, those kinds of things. So we allow those four different pieces in these training schedules, and then the numbers basically correlate to the strength of it. So there's depending on how well your coaching staff is set up, and depending on the personalities of your players, you can safely get away with having 20 points set up here. You could probably bump it up to 21, 22, 23 points, and you're probably fine. Like there's not, you can add a point or two here or there, and you're okay. What you can't do is go all tens on everything, and then, well, you can't because we set a limit to the max is 25 anyway. But you can't, if you stay with too high in numbers on any individual drill, you can start running into problems where this will overtrain that particular athlete because a 10 is just too intense. So you can do it, it's just risky. And if you do it too many weeks in a row, or you do it too often, then you'll start affecting morale. You'll start affecting injury rates and things like that. So a lot of times, what folks will do is just stick with the standard 5, and then um, maybe bump up a couple here or there, just to push their kids a little bit. But then maybe during the season they bring it back down so that they're not overworking the kids. Um, if you go too low on these, you could get regression. So if you set these all to 3, yeah, it's a nice easy workout for the kids, but if you're not pushing them a little bit, or at least trying to maintain, then yeah, going too low on these numbers, you'll start to see regression. So the numbers will actually decrease. So you don't want that. You want to keep these numbers relatively stable at, between 4 and 6 or whatever. And then just make sure that if you want to push the kids, you can try increasing these numbers as you go, but just be aware to keep an eye on the emails and make sure that that you're not causing more problems than the benefits that you're getting out of it. It's a little bit of a risk versus reward kind of thing. Crank them up if you want, but just monitor it and make sure that you're getting the benefits that you want. The head coach and OC focus and DC focus are just where you focus on a particular player. The head coach might really want to be working one-on-one with the quarterback that he's trying to bring along, and the OC might want to work with a particular wide receiver, or maybe a running back, and then or maybe the quarterback as well. And then the DC might be focusing on a particular defensive end or whatnot, where they're trying to just give a little bit of special attention to the player so that they get a little bit extra benefit during the season, during camps. So that is training. I'm looking over to see if we have any questions in chat. I don't see any. So I think that's mostly what I wanted to cover for this time around, just to kind of show when you're managing your team. Again, these are the screens you're going to be hanging out in. The depth chart screen, the strategy screen, the training screen, and then obviously all the sub screens underneath it. So if you have any questions about those particular aspects, feel free to let us know. Um, I guess I could wrap it up by kind of going over one of the things that we do get questions on, which is the skill ratings and the personality ratings of the players. I can cover that real quick. Um, so most of these things are going to be physical attributes of a player, and then some of the uh, parts of the AI actually use combinations of these and combinations of particular traits that a player may have. Uh, some of the difference in coaching styles and play calling and game planning and strategy, all those kind of go into how these different player ratings are applied. So overall is not really used internally in the game. This is just a one number view of all of these ratings and all of these things all kind of baked into a formula. So the overall number doesn't do much as far as the engine goes, but it's a quick way for people to view what level that particular player is at. What we recommend is not really ignoring overall because it's a good number for comparison purposes, but you really want to look at the individual ratings so you know how best to deploy a particular player. So strength is pretty much as you would expect. It's the ability um, to successfully block, successfully avoid blocks, successfully tackle, successfully um, avoid tackle, well, not avoid tackles, but break tackles. Um, how long you can hold blocks. But there's a lot of different checks that we use strength for to that go into play. So strength is pretty important for offensive linemen, defensive linemen. It can come into play with running backs and fullbacks, tight ends that are blocking, that kind of thing. Agility is kind of a slight adjustment to the way speed works. So agility is, for us, it's the way to avoid tackles, to break out of tackles. Um, if you're a defender, it affects things like being able to jump a route, to be able to get around a receiver to knock the ball down, uh, being agile enough to actually tackle somebody. So it will affect linebackers and defensive backs that are trying to tackle. So agility is like all of these are important. It's just they they take on different weights depending on the particular aspect of the game that it's evaluating. Arm is pretty much just for quarterbacks. This is the ability to thread the needle, to hit a target, downfield, to throw the ball far enough downfield. Um, so if you have a high arm but low accuracy, you might have a lot of downfield throws, but they might be less successful because you're just winging it all over the place and you're not very accurate. If you have a super high accuracy and a super low arm, well, then you might just be dinking and dunking and you're not able to make the throws downfield, even though he thinks he could try, which will result in interceptions and that kind of thing. So, yeah, you're going to want to keep an eye on. Actually, all three of these, arm, intelligence, and accuracy, really go into a quarterback to really mold kind of what style of quarterback they are, whether they're downfield throwers, whether they're accurate at low or short distances, and then the intelligence affects their decision making, when to throw it deep, when to throw it short, when to avoid double coverage, those kinds of things. So you really want for a quarterback, you want all three of those numbers to be pretty much as high as you can get them. But depending on which numbers are higher than the others will kind of shape and mold the way that the quarterback comes out. Intelligence also goes into play with linebackers for positioning, for defensive backs for positioning and interceptions and knocking the ball down and things like that. So intelligence does affect multiple positions. Tackling, that's pretty much just the defensive straight up, how well can you tackle? The higher the number, the better you are at bringing somebody down early, and that kind of thing, forcing fumbles. So you're going to want that number pretty much as high as you can get it for pretty much every defender if you can. Speed is a big one for pretty much every player because it governs the physical nature of the engine. So if a player is faster than another player, a lot of these other ratings don't matter, because if you can't catch them, it doesn't matter if you can tackle or not. If you can't catch up to them, it's not even going to make the tackle check. So speed affects everything from how quickly the quarterback drops back, uh, rolls out, takes off and runs if he decides to do so. Running back speed, wide receiver speed, linebackers speed in coverage, defensive end speed, all your defensive line, just how quickly they run around on the field. So in some cases, you might actually have players that are a little bit too fast and they over pursue, or they're getting to their spots, too early, and then making bad decisions if they have low intelligence and things like that. So it's not always at the highest speed is the best, but uh, for a lot of cases it is. It's the you want the player to be able to get there in time to do what they need to do. So the higher the speed, the better in most cases. There's just a few little odd idiosyncrasies of the engine where having the highest speed isn't always the best. Or to better phrase it, you don't need 100 speed. Like 60 speed might be good enough for them to do what they need to do. So you can tinker with that and see. Above all, we want you to evaluate the player as a whole. We want you to look at all of the ratings. We want you to look at all of the statistics and see where are they excelling, what kind of situations do they excel in, so that you can make the best decisions about your roster. Hands affects blocking, breaking tackles, breaking blocks. It also affects catching the ball, knocking the ball down. So hands are important for receivers. It's important for blockers. It's kind of important for pretty much every position. Avoiding fumbles also. So you don't need 100 hands to do a bunch of stuff, but you do. If you start to see players that have low hands, it will start to negatively impact them. So that's how that one works. Pass and run blocking are ratings for our tight ends and linemen and fullbacks and running backs to, well, pretty much everybody on the offensive side has some kind of blocking rating. So you want those as high as possible for your primary blockers. If you can get high in both numbers, then they can be every down players. But if you end up with players that have a high one or the other, then that's where the depth chart packages come into play, where you can swap those guys in or out depending on what kind of play calling you're expecting to happen under those scenarios. Then kick accuracy and kick distance. Kick distance is basically a check for how deep of a field goal will they actually try and attempt. If a coach doesn't feel super comfortable with them because that kick distance is, in the 70s or in the 80s, then maybe they won't go for a 55 or a 60-yard field goal. Or in college, maybe they won't even go for a 50-yard field goal. Maybe they'll feel that they need upper 90s or whatever before they really start to trust the kicker to really kick from deep. And the accuracy is just how accurate they are at any range. So you want basically those numbers as high as possible. Endurance affects a lot of the energy aspect of the game. So when you sub guys in or out, how tired they get, how prone to injury they are, those kinds of things. So that affects every position. You're gonna want that number relatively high. It will fall throughout the season depending on if they recover or not from week to week. So that's kind of how that rating works. The personality ratings are, you can't evaluate any one of them individually. You kind of got to take them all because they all affect every decision that a recruit might make when they're choosing a school. So, we blend them all together, and that's kind of how you end up with the decision point that the student looks at. So, leadership, work ethic, competitiveness, they're all just varying ways of them evaluating a school based off of how far away they are, what the prestige of the school is, what the personalities of the coaches, playing time, how big the school is, fan base, that kind of thing. So that's how all of these ratings work. It basically, it adjusts how valuable an offer is at a particular school based off of all of these numbers. So if they're really, really interested in values winning and they have a high rating, like a 78 is decently high, then they will, if a school is not a winning school, then it will penalize you. But if they are a winning school, then you'll get bonuses for it. So the values playing time is a really low rating. In this case, the kid had a 6. So that means he doesn't really care about playing time at all. So you won't get dinged for that, but you won't get any bonuses either. If you have playing time for the kid and he doesn't really value it, then it won't really give him any bonuses. So but again, you can't evaluate any one little thing because they all affect everything. So they just depend on how all of the numbers come out and how the math works. It's just kind of a cool. Well, and then player skills. I'll cover that real quick while we're here. But player skills are basically how well they play the position. So the way this is supposed to work is like if you're trying to change a player's position from like running back to fullback or from linebacker to strong safety or whatever. In this case, this kid was probably trained to be a linebacker for his whole career, but he probably has the skill set to also play strong safety. He's just not as good at strong safety because he's primarily a linebacker. So there's certain aspects of the strong safety role that you wouldn't be able to perform unless you were a strong safety and you had been doing it for a while. So that's kind of how these skills work, is the longer you play a position, the closer to 100 this number gets. Just because the number falls to 80 or 60 or whatever doesn't mean they can't play the position. It just means they're not going to get huge bonuses for being, really repetitive and consistent with how much they play the position. So this kid on the screen would get bonuses for different aspects of being a linebacker when the AI is checking across all these things, tackling and whatnot. So as a linebacker, he'd get some bonuses. As a defensive end, he might get a few bonuses here or there for being in the 80s. As a strong safety, he's good. He can do it. He might not get any bonuses for it, but he won't have any problems with it at all. But as you start getting into the 50s and 40s and 30s on different skills, then you can actually not just not get bonuses, but you start to see some negative effects of players basically playing out of position at that point. So it doesn't mean that they won't grow at the position. They won't gain the skill, and going from a 30 to a 60 to an 80 might happen over a season or 2 or 3. So it's certainly possible. It doesn't mean they can't play the position. It just means that if you put them there, they're just not going to perform as well as somebody who's been playing that position for a long time and has an innate ability to do it. So don't feel like you can't throw a 50 skill player in there at some point. Don't feel like you can throw a 40 skill player in there. I mean, you can do it. Just be aware that if you're comparing a 40 skill player to a 90 skill player, there will be differences. It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that you would prefer one over the other. So, and I would say that the player skills have more of a boost and nerf effect to all of the other numbers. So it would be much more like for example, you wouldn't want to put a 65 speed cornerback in the game just because he was rated 100 at cornerback over a 95 speed cornerback that was rated at 60. Like I'd rather have a decent 60 level skilled cornerback that was 95 speed versus, even if somebody was a little bit better at knowing the position, if he's 20% slower, he's not going to be as effective. So you're going to want to take those numbers with that in mind, where the skill ratings definitely will override a lot of these things, and you're going to want to pay attention to that. You don't want to put a deficient physical specimen of a player in just because they might know the position a little bit better. You're better off putting a 50 or 60 level skill player in that's got much better ratings. Just to try and clear that up. So I think we'll start wrapping it up there. Notice Breeze joined us for a second. I'm not sure how many folks have been in the stream, but for those of you that joined, I definitely appreciate you taking a look at this. We're still in first access. There's still a little bit of time for some feedback on things. If you'd like to see changes made, feel free to post on the forums or catch us on Slack or Discord, and we're happy to take a look at things. That being said, we'll try and do some more of these streams up until we get to first access. If you have ideas or things that you'd like me to go over in more detail, like I said, feel free to reach out and we will try to do that. So thank you for being here. Thank you for supporting the channel and for supporting Wolverine Studios. It's not too late to jump in on first access. Check it out at wolverinestudios.com, and we will see you in the next one. Thank you.